I've always been considered the perfect wife. The kind of woman other women envy but never show it. Discreet, well-mannered, always well-groomed without being flashy. Jack, my husband, prided himself on having such a dedicated partner to our home and family. Little did he know that behind this impeccable facade existed a world of secrets and forbidden desires. I didn't start our story thinking I'd cheat on him. In fact, when we got married 8 years ago, I truly believed we'd be happy forever, like in fairy tales. Jack was, and still is, a handsome, hardworking man respected by everyone. The problem is that he's always been extremely focused on work, with that typical obsession of businessmen who think that providing well for the family is enough. Over time, loneliness set in. The nights became too long, the weekends monotonous, and that look of admiration I loved to see in his eyes was replaced by an almost boring familiarity. I kept striving to be the perfect wife, keeping the house immaculate, preparing elaborate dinners, dressing well, but Jack barely noticed. It was on one of those lonely nights that I began to notice the glances from Ethan, my husband's best friend. Unlike Jack, Ethan always noticed when I changed my haircut or wore a new dress. His observations came disguised as casual comments, but his eyes said so much more. Ethan was the opposite of Jack, extroverted, playful, always with a compliment on the tip of his tongue. While my husband spent hours in endless meetings, Ethan found time to show up at the house with some excuse or another. He needed to use our Wi-Fi because his was having problems, he wanted to borrow that book Jack had mentioned, or he was simply passing through the area. At first, I kept a safe distance. I smiled politely at his jokes, served coffee when he showed up, but always kept our interaction within socially acceptable limits. However, like a drop of water insistently falling on a stone, his constant presence gradually eroded my defenses. I remember perfectly the first time something changed between us. It was a Saturday afternoon. Jack had been called to resolve an emergency at work, as always, and Ethan showed up to return some tools he had borrowed. He was wearing a simple white t-shirt that accentuated his strong arms, so different from Jack's, who spent all day in expensive suits. "You look different today," he commented as I served the usual coffee. "There's something in your eyes." I felt my cheeks flush. I had spent the morning at the salon, but Jack hadn't even noticed. "It's just a change in my hair," I replied, trying to sound casual. Ethan moved closer, subtly invading my personal space. "It's not just the hair. There's something more, something Jack's an idiot for not noticing." Those words, spoken in a low, husky voice, made my heart race. For the first time, I allowed my gaze to meet his without looking away, and what I saw there both frightened and excited me. It was pure desire, mixed with an admiration I hadn't received from my husband in a long time. At that moment, I felt something awaken inside me. A sensation that had been dormant for years, a fire I thought had gone out. Nothing happened that afternoon, at least not physically. But when Ethan left, I knew something fundamental had changed. I spent the entire night tossing and turning in bed, thinking about Ethan's gaze, the way he had approached me, the tone of his voice. Jack came home late, as usual, barely noticing my restlessness. He lay down beside me and was asleep within minutes, while I remained awake, reliving every second of that afternoon. It was then that I began to realize that I wasn't just the perfect wife everyone saw. There was something more in me, something that was about to awaken and completely change my life. What I didn't know was that Ethan would be just the first of a series of secrets I would keep in the years to come. The truth is that at that moment, lying next to my deeply sleeping husband, I began to plan. Not consciously, perhaps, but something inside me already knew that my life was about to transform into an elaborate game of appearances and hidden desires. The days following that afternoon with Ethan were a delicious torture. Every time he appeared at our house, I felt an electric current run through my body. Our gazes crossed more frequently, and an almost palpable tension settled in the air. Jack, absorbed in his meetings and spreadsheets, noticed nothing. In fact, he even encouraged his friend's presence, saying it was good for me to have company when he needed to work late. If he only knew the kind of company his best friend was about to become. The inevitable happened on a Thursday afternoon. Jack was away on a business trip, and Ethan showed up with the excuse of picking up some documents my husband had promised to set aside. Of course, the documents weren't where they were supposed to be. I had made sure of that. "That's too bad," I said, pretending to search. "Jack must have taken them with him on the trip. Why don't you come in for some coffee while I call him and ask?" Ethan readily accepted, as I knew he would. I served the coffee with slightly trembling hands, aware of his gaze following me around the kitchen. When I turned around, he was very close. "You know I didn't come for the documents," he said, his voice huskier than normal. I feigned surprise, although my heart was racing. "No." He took another step towards me. "You know very well why I come here every day. Why I look for any excuse to see you." "Ethan." I began, but the words died in my throat when he gently touched my face. The kiss, when it finally happened, was like an explosion. Years of repressed desire, of unmet needs, all came to the surface at that moment. His hands roamed my body with an urgency I hadn't felt in a long time, and I surrendered completely to that sensation. It was quick, intense, and absolutely transformative. Afterwards, lying in my bed, the same bed I shared with Jack, I watched Ethan get dressed with a mixture of guilt and excitement. "This can't happen again," I said, although I knew I was lying. He smiled, that smile I already knew so well. "We both know it will happen." And it did. Many, many times. We developed an almost perfect system. Ethan knew Jack's routine as well as I did, and we knew exactly when it was safe to meet. The adrenaline of danger, the fear of being discovered, all of this only increased the excitement. It was through Ethan that I met Ryan. Unlike Ethan, who was outgoing and playful, Ryan was the type of man who exuded an aura of mystery and contained power. Tall, always impeccably dressed, with a penetrating gaze that seemed to see through one's soul. Our first encounter was at a dinner party at our house, where Jack gathered some work friends. While Ethan was casting furtive glances that I knew so well, I noticed that Ryan was observing me differently, more analytically, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. At the end of the night, as he was saying goodbye, he held my hand a little longer than necessary. "You're a fascinating woman," he said in a low voice, "just for me. Much more than you appear to be." Those words haunted me for days. Ryan had seen beyond the facade of the perfect wife that I maintained. This intrigued and frightened me at the same time. A few weeks later, I ran into him by chance at a coffee shop downtown. I was alone, having gone out to buy a birthday present for Jack. Ryan invited me to sit at his table, and we ended up talking for hours. It was different from Ethan. While my first lover was pure passion and impulse, Ryan was calculated, intriguing. He asked me questions that no one had ever asked, showed genuine interest in my opinions, made me feel intelligent and desired in a completely new way. The first kiss happened that same day, in the mall parking lot. It wasn't explosive like with Ethan, it was slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring every second. His hands didn't roam my body urgently, on the contrary, they just held my face firmly, keeping me there, present in that moment. "You deserve more than furtive encounters in parking lots," he said afterward. "Let me show you." And he did. Ryan had an apartment downtown, an elegant and discreet place where I started spending some afternoons. He introduced me to expensive wines, took me to sophisticated restaurants in neighboring towns where nobody knew us, made me feel special in a way that neither Jack nor Ethan had ever managed. The most surprising thing was how I managed to handle both affairs simultaneously. Ethan continued to show up at home with his flimsy excuses, and our encounters remained intense and passionate. Ryan occupied a different space in my life. He was my sophisticated refuge, my escape to a world of refinement and culture. And Jack, well, Jack continued to be the perfect husband in the eyes of society. Hardworking, dedicated, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was living a double, or would it be triple, life right under his nose. Over time, I realized that keeping two lovers wasn't as difficult as I had imagined. In fact, it was almost like a game of chess, where each piece needed to be moved with precision and strategy. And I was becoming an excellent player. It was during this time that Tyler entered my life. A recent friend of Jack's, he had moved to the city not long ago and often showed up at our Sunday barbecues. Younger than the others, Tyler had that typical energy of men in their 30s, mixed with a maturity that set him apart from guys his age. Our first moment alone happened when Jack assigned him to help me with some computer problems. Little did my husband know that I had created those problems myself after noticing how Tyler looked at me during the barbecues. "You did this on purpose," he said, while pretending to fix the computer in my office. I smiled, neither confirming nor denying. "Did what?" "Create this computer problem. I'm not stupid, you know. I've been watching you for weeks." His honesty caught me off guard. Unlike Ethan with his constant flirting, or Ryan with his sophisticated seduction, Tyler was direct, almost brutal in his sincerity. "And if I did?" I provoked. He stood up from the chair where he was sitting, coming towards me with a determination that made me hold my breath. "Then I'd say you're even more interesting than I imagined." Tyler's kiss was different from the others. There was urgency, yes, but there was also a kind of reverence, as if he couldn't believe his own luck. His hands were strong, decisive, and for the first time, I felt completely submissive to a man. Tyler brought a new element to my secret life. While Ethan was pure passion and Ryan was sophistication, Tyler was intensity. Our encounters were always charged with an almost violent energy, a physical need that left me exhausted and at the same time wanting more. It was through him that I met Zach, the last to enter this complex web I had woven. Zach was a personal trainer, Tyler's gym buddy, and ended up being introduced to Jack at another one of our barbecues. The attraction was immediate and mutual. Zach had the kind of body you only get with daily hours at the gym, and a smile that lit up any room. But what attracted me most was his simplicity, so different from Ryan's sophistication or Tyler's intensity. With 4 different lovers, my life transformed into an elaborate logistical puzzle. Each of them occupied a specific space in my routine, and I needed to be extremely careful so that the pieces never met. Ethan continued with his furtive encounters at home, always using his friendship with Jack as an excuse. Ryan received me in his elegant apartment twice a week, always with an expensive bottle of wine waiting. Tyler preferred riskier encounters, in his car, in motels on the road, always with that characteristic urgency. And Zach, well, Zach started giving me private Pilates lessons at home, at times when I knew Jack would be at work. The most fascinating thing was how each of them made me feel like a different woman. With Ethan, I was the ardent and forbidden lover. With Ryan, I transformed into a sophisticated and mysterious woman. With Tyler, I let my wildest side surface. And with Zach, I was almost innocent, like a dedicated student. The danger, of course, lay in the intersections. They all knew Jack, they all frequented my house, they were all part of the same social circle. It was like dancing on a tightrope, knowing that a single misstep could make everything crumble. It was Ethan who first began to show signs of jealousy. Perhaps because he was the first, he felt somehow more entitled to the situation. It started with seemingly casual comments about how I seemed different, more distant. "You've been spending a lot of time with Ryan lately," he commented one day, after one of our encounters. "Jack mentioned that you've been meeting to discuss that decoration project." I felt my heart race, but maintained my composure. It's an important project for the house. You know how Jack trusts his taste. Ethan looked at me differently, more intensely. I'm just afraid you might be risking too much. People might start to notice. It was a veiled warning, and I knew it. Ethan was marking his territory, alerting me that he was paying attention to my movements. It was the first moment I felt real fear that my house of cards might collapse. To maintain control of the situation, I realized I needed to be even more careful. I started creating an elaborate scheduling system, using different colors in my calendar to mark the encounters, always with codes that only I could understand. Jack, in his blissful ignorance, even praised how I had become more organized. You always know where each of our friends is, what they're doing. It's great to have such a sociable wife, he would say, filling me with guilt and, at the same time, a perverse satisfaction. It was on a Sunday afternoon that I had my first moment of real panic. Jack had organized a barbecue, and for the first time, all my lovers were present at the same time. Ethan was drinking beer and telling his usual jokes, but his eyes followed me constantly. Ryan, always elegant even in casual barbecue attire, was talking business with Jack, but occasionally gave me that penetrating look I knew so well. Tyler was playing in the pool with the other guests' children, his athletic body attracting the attention of the other women present. And Zach was discussing diets and exercises with some guests, always smiling that disarming smile of his. It was like watching different versions of my life colliding in slow motion. The mistake happened when I went to the kitchen to get more ice. Ryan followed me, discreetly as always. "You're tense today," he whispered, approaching as I rummaged in the freezer. "It's nothing," I replied, trying to keep my distance. "It's because of them, isn't it?" His voice was laden with something I had never noticed before, jealousy. "Ethan can't take his eyes off you. And that personal trainer. Zach, isn't it? He's not very discreet either." I felt my blood run cold. Ryan was noticing more than he should. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice small changes in everyone's behavior. Ethan was more possessive, Ryan more questioning, Tyler more demanding, and Zach needier. It was as if an invisible energy was connecting them all, making them realize that something was wrong, something they couldn't exactly identify, but that bothered them deeply. The moment that scared me the most was when Jack made a seemingly innocent comment during dinner. "Have you noticed how strange Ethan's been acting lately? The other day I caught him looking at a photo of us from last summer with such an intense expression." When I asked what was wrong, he quickly changed the subject. I began to question my choices. Not out of moral regret, surprisingly, that was never an issue for me. What worried me was the increasingly real possibility of losing everything: my marriage, my reputation, my carefully constructed life. Everything almost came crashing down one night when Ethan showed up at the house, visibly altered by drink. Jack wasn't home, and he knew it. "I can't take it anymore," he said, barging into the living room. "I can't stand seeing you with them, pretending nothing's going on. Ethan, you're drunk. Go home." "With who?" asked a voice behind us. It was Ryan, who had arrived silently. What happened next was surprising. Instead of an explosion of anger or accusations, the two men looked at each other with a mutual understanding that left me stunned. "You too?" Ethan asked Ryan. "From the beginning," Ryan replied, with a sad smile. It was at that moment that I realized they had always known about each other. Maybe not specifically who, but they knew they weren't exclusive. And, even more surprisingly, they had silently accepted it, each for their own reasons. The truth is that I was never discovered by Jack. Nor do I intend to be. The other men in my life came to a tacit agreement among themselves, a silent pact to preserve what we had built. Ethan eventually moved to another city, but we still see each other occasionally. Ryan maintains our sophisticated encounters in his apartment. Tyler found a girlfriend, but we can't resist some sporadic meetings. And Zach, well, the Pilates lessons continue. As for me, I continue to be the perfect wife in everyone's eyes. Jack still works too much, still doesn't give me the attention I need, and still prides himself on having such a dedicated and understanding wife. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I think about how my life has transformed into this complex game of appearances and desires. I don't regret it. Every moment, every encounter, every lie has made me who I am today. A woman who has learned to live on the edge, who discovered that life is much more interesting when lived in the shadows. Some may judge me, others may secretly envy me. But no one really knows me. No one, except those 4 men who share my secrets, each keeping their own part of this story. And so I continued, dancing my secret dance, knowing that at any moment everything could crumble, but choosing to live each second with the intensity that only those who risk everything can understand.